Zelated, thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. You are welcome to my channel. This is Aduba, and if you are new here, please subscribe on this channel. I share educational content concerning Africa and those in the diaspora. So together the black race can unite to fight for our total liberation. We have gone through a lot in history. The transatlantic slave trade. Before then, we have the Arab slave trade. And that one was more brutal. But why they don't talk about that is a question. And then today the white people are telling us that they have also gone through slavery. And for that matter, we shouldn't look at ours to be more brutal than theirs. What we have gone through, they never went through that. And I don't know the reason to which when it comes to Africa, we have people who are rising to defend. Yet there are some people that they have paid some huge sum of money to them, trying to protect them because they said they have gone through holy whatever. I don't want to mention their name.
Yes, white people were slaves, but it was not even close to the level of the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade was so bad and killed so many people just on the ships to America that sharks literally changed their migration patterns to follow the ships because they were consuming the bodies of the people who decided that they did not want to face a life of bondage. And then once they arrived in America, they were subsequently sold, separated from their families, and eaten. There are cookbooks that instructed white people on how to cook the bodies of Black Americans and literally use every single resource. Their teeth were pulled to create dentures for white people. Their skin was used to create books. And then they were worked for every single ounce of labor. And then when they were subsequently from being overworked or just because the white person decided one day to them, that is very different from white people who were forced to work against their will but still could leave in the evening from indentured servitude. It is in no way, shape, or form the same. Stop using this argument. It makes you sound fucking stupid. It shows a level of willful ignorance about what white people did to Black people for centuries. That's the kind of shit that lives in the DNA. That is so deeply traumatic.
This might be the one that gets me kicked off this platform. So, I'm gonna be graphic. It is what it is. Let's talk. Because this week something happened that took us about 400 years to get to. And before I tell you what was said, I need to tell you what was being named. Because this is the part that never gets said with the weight that it deserves. Before a single ship left the coast of West Africa, the people who were going to be put on it were already being processed, stripped naked, prodded, groped. Traders invasively examined the breast, buttocks, and vaginal areas of women and girls, allegedly to assess their childbearing ability. Men and boys were groped around the groin, scrotum, and anus. One white trafficker who later testified described the process as similar to what you would do to a horse before purchasing it. These were human beings, y'all. They were being evaluated the way that you would evaluate livestock. And when the evaluation was done, they were assigned a number, not a name, a number, and loaded onto ships. These ships were built into two categories: tight packers and loose packers. Tight packers maximized profit. Human beings were measured with instruments with charts to calculate how many bodies could be chained in a single row. The space allocated per person was roughly the size of a coffin. Men were shackled together in pairs at the wrist and ankles and packed into the hold lying on their sides, unable to sit up, unable to turn over, unable to move. The heat in the hold was lethal and suffocating. There was almost no ventilation. The air was so thick with human waste, sweat, and disease that sailors reported being unable to breathe when they opened the hatch. Dysentery tore through entire decks. People vomited on each other. People had diarrhea on each other. People died chained to the person beside them and stayed there, rotting, until someone came to remove the body. Sometimes that took days. Smallpox spread. Measles spread. The living were chained to the dead in spaces the size of coffins, in heat that historians describe as suffocating and unbearable. In the middle of the ocean, women were kept unchained in separate compartments, not as mercy, but because being unchained made them easier to access. Crew members raped them throughout the voyage, not occasionally, routinely. Those who resisted were flogged. Women gave birth on those ships, without medical care, without assistance. In those conditions, most newborns didn't survive. In one documented case, a captain punished a failed rebellion by killing one of the men involved immediately and forcing two other enslaved people to eat his heart and liver, while the rest watched. This is in the historical record, y'all. It is documented in historical accounts of the Middle Passage. About 15% of the people put on those ships, nearly 2 million human beings, died before they reached land. They were thrown overboard, and some were thrown overboard alive, because maritime insurance paid for cargo lost at sea, not cargo that died of illness. Throwing people into the ocean alive was more profitable than letting them die of disease. The most documented case is the Zong Massacre of 1781, in which a British captain threw 132 enslaved people into the ocean alive and filed an insurance claim. The case went to court. The question before the court wasn't whether a crime had been committed, though. The question was whether the insurance policy covered the loss. The ones who survived the crossing arrived at a port and then were processed again. Before they were sold, their skin was rubbed with oil to disguise cracking and lesions. Their heads were sometimes shaved to remove gray hairs and bacteria, to make them look younger and healthier than they actually were. They were examined again by buyers, poked, prodded, molested. George Washington, who would become the first president of the United States, specified in writing in 1772 that he preferred enslaved people not exceeding 20 years of age. He was placing an order for human beings, like you would place an order for food, and the ones who were purchased were put to work. About 80% of enslaved Africans transported across the Middle Passage ended up on sugar plantations in South America and the Caribbean, where the mortality rate was so high that the entire enslaved population had to be continuously replaced through the ongoing slave trade. People worked from before dawn until after dark, in gangs, cutting sugarcane in tropical heat. Feeding it into mills regularly took fingers, hands, and arms. Life expectancy on a sugar plantation was measured in years, not decades. The system consumed people. That was the model. You work them to death and then you buy more. In the United States, enslaved people were raped systematically by the men who owned them, by overseers, by anyone the law permitted. And when those rapes produced children, those children were born enslaved. The enslaver's blood ran through the veins of the people that he owned. Families were deliberately separated at auction. Children sold away from mothers, husbands sold away from wives, with a specific intention that they would never find each other again. Their languages were criminalized. Their religions were outlawed. Their names were replaced with the names of the men who owned them. Reading and writing were made illegal. The systematic destruction of identity, culture, language, family, and humanity was not incidental to the system. It was the system. You can't enslave a person that knows who they are. So they made sure people didn't know. This ran for 400 years. The records are a little fuzzy, but between 12 and 14 million people were stolen from Africa. Nearly 2 million died on the crossing. Tens of millions more were born into slavery in the Americas. The wealth generated by their labor built banking systems, the insurance industries, the textile industries, and the national economies of Britain, Spain, France, Portugal, the Netherlands, and the United States. That wealth was inherited. It was compounded. It is still here.
TikTok, this isn't bullying or harassment for educational purposes only. You literally sent me a message. I've never sent her a message. Saying your ancestors' racism was worse than mine, as if you know that or know anything about me or mine. It's wild you think this is comprehension or educating. The education part is trying to explain to you that you're referring to indentured servitude. That some of your ancestors, be it Irish, Scottish, I have no idea, came to this country as an indentured servant, meaning they were either A, a criminal, B, they owed money to someone and couldn't pay it back, they were in debtor's jail or whatever else, and they were sent to the Americas to pay off that debt. There was a time date expiration on that contract, meaning they might have been an indentured servant for 5 years because they owed $100 to someone they couldn't pay back. At the end of those 5 years, they were released from that work punishment to work off their debt. And at the end of that time period, they could also receive land, a house, and money. During that time period of their indentured servitude, they could marry whoever they wanted. They could have children, and those children would not be born into slavery or into servitude. That is a very stark difference than chattel slavery. I would give you an example to watch 12 Years a Slave, but you're not going to do it because you're not even watching this video. Brad Pitt's in it, okay? It shows the storyline of a person who is a freed man. He was never a slave before, educated, got kidnapped, put into slavery, and no one believed him that he was free. Then he worked alongside Brad Pitt, who was an indentured servant, who got to eat in the big house, who got better food, better treatment, didn't have to work as long hours. And at the end of his little servitude, skedaddled on out. and told someone about the guy that he met that was educated and can read and write and play the violin and that shouldn't have been on that plantation. I would watch that movie. It would help you understand the difference in treatments. African people who were stolen and forced into slavery, they were brought to Americas stripped of everything culturally. They purposely separated them from folks that spoke the same language or from the same tribe, the same ethnicity, because they wanted to infiltrate and strip them of everything. They cut their hair off and used it as stuffing for cushions and furniture. You can YouTube and Google any of this if you don't believe me. They were forced to breed with whoever would make the strongest slave. If that was their mother, sister, brother, father, uncle, cousin, didn't matter. You had to do it. They had zero bodily autonomy. In fact, there were laws protecting indentured servants from being unalived and raped and being held accountable for it for slave owners. For slaves, there was no accountability. Slaves showed up unalive, it is what it is. For indentured servants, they had to show and prove the body, what happened, and there was an investigation.
Thanks so much for this question. I do want to talk about the differences between indentured servitude and slavery because a lot of times I hear these terms used interchangeably and conflated, but actually they are distinctly different things. So yesterday I made a TikTok where I debunked different myths about slavery in the US, and one of the myths that I debunked was this idea that Irish immigrants who came to America were brought here as slaves. We know that this is a bit of propaganda that was created by Southerners who were pro-slavery. What actually happened was many Irish immigrants who came to America were actually brought here as indentured servants. Several of you in the comments asked, well, what's the difference between an indentured servant and a slave? The differences are actually pretty distinct and pretty simple, but if you have more questions, you are free to visit google.com. One of the biggest differences between indentured servitude and slavery is that indentured servitude was voluntary, slavery was involuntary. In an indentured servitude contract, it was basically an agreement between an immigrant and a wealthy American, usually, that basically acted as sort of sponsorship. The wealthy American would sponsor an immigrant, allow them to come to America, and in exchange for that sponsorship, the indentured servant would do a fixed amount of work for a fixed amount of time. What was actually owned in that kind of agreement was the labor of the indentured servant, not the actual servant. In contrast, in chattel slavery, slaves were bought, not their labor, but their actual bodies. They were actually bought involuntarily from their homelands and forced to do labor, not for a fixed amount of time, but for the rest of their lives, unless they could buy their freedom. We know that there were some people who were able to buy their freedom, but it was not a common occurrence. The other really distinct thing about indentured servitude was that these indentured servitude contracts were specifically between the indentured servant and the person sponsoring them, their master. It was just between the two of them. In slavery, it wasn't just the slave, the person who was owned, it was any children that they had as well. It was a hereditary slavery system. Indentured servants who fulfilled their indentured servitude contracts after they finished them were free to be normal members of society equal to anybody else. In contrast, we know, due to extremely racist legislation, that even those people, those slaves who were able to buy the freedom for themselves and their families, they might have been free, but they definitely were not equal members of society, free to vote, free to own land, etc. Now, I don't want to diminish or downplay the harsh realities of being an indentured servant and pretend that it was just a great agreement. Indentured servants were often under the age of 21, and it's true that many died due to the harsh conditions of the labor they were subjected to. But at the end of the day, it was still a voluntary indentured servitude agreement, and they were guaranteed to be freed after the indentured servant contract was complete. Again, you can read more about this if you want to know more, but I just wanted to give a really quick overview here. The more you know.
The white people should understand that the brutality that we face in their own people's hand is not compared to what they have gone through. Even on the field, they were still treated some kind of way than us. We were subject to nothing. The people who died on the Atlantic wasn't small. The separation of people. Look at the other things that the person brought out, to the point that they see the African to be somebody that they can eat. Yet these are the people who told the African that we eat ourselves. They have done a lot of things to us. You, the people outside of the black race, you understand that. Even though you have your own history of slavery, but what we went through is not what you have gone through. It's not quarter of what we have faced and what we are still facing, because even today, we are still being or segregated. You still see us to be inferior, because in order for you not to see that the system that they have designed is working against you, they have to create this narrative to make you feel like you are better than the black person, and that is why you people can go to any length to look down upon us. But the system that they have built is not favoring you. It's just displeasing everybody. So we need to give credit to where credit is due. Africans, the pain we went through, the pain we are going through is not anything compared to what you have gone through. So don't let it look as if we are giving special attention to what happened to the black people and we are leaving you. So we need to talk about your slavery. Even today we are still seeing slavery. Look at what happened to George Floyd and what is still happening to a lot of people. You don't go through that pain. Africans are still tagged for anything that is not good. And I like the way their own people are bringing them back to classroom to let them understand what they have failed to understand. We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall. And united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we'll make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world and in the United States of America.